You were going to live twice as long as a Viking. The average life expectancy in the Viking Age barely scraped 40 years. That is a historical fact. But here is the brutal paradox that academia and modern self-help refuse to accept. The Viking who died at 40 often lived a life fuller, more intense, and with more meaning than yours, which is projected to last 80, 90, or even 100 years. We have traded intensity for longevity, and the result is a life that stretches out but hollows out. I promise that by the end of this script, you will have 3 practical lessons extracted from Nordic philosophy that can inject meaning and urgency into your existence, transforming your coming years into what the Vikings would call a life worthy of being sung about. First, we need to understand the reality. When we say a Viking died at 40, it's not that he retired and then died of old age. Infant mortality was sky high. If you survived childhood, you had a decent chance of reaching 40, but that journey was a minefield. Death by infection from a superficial cut, death in childbirth, death by dysentery, death crossing the North Sea. Life was brutally short, which forced a complete cognitive restructuring of what time means. In our society, time is a renewable resource. You fail a project today, you try again tomorrow. You don't like your job, you change it in 2 years. There is an illusion of infinity. But the Viking, time was a non-renewable and scarce resource. And this scarcity did not generate paralyzing anxiety, it generated immediate action and focus. They didn't fear death, they feared obscurity. The only real immortality was reputation, the story that would be left behind. And that brings us to practical lesson number 1, the foundation of the entire Nordic mindset. Practical lesson number 1, the structure of imminent death, the active memento mori. The concept of memento mori, remember that you must die, is ancient, but the Vikings codified it in a way that made it an engine of productivity and meaning, not a trigger for depression. For us, death is a distant event, something that happens at the end of a long series of events. For the Viking, death was a constant companion. They understood that life was a short rope, and the only real control you had was over how you used the length of that rope. Modern behavioral science has a concept called hyperbolic temporal discounting. In simple terms, it means we tend to value immediate rewards much more than future rewards. That's why we eat the cake now, even knowing that long-term health is more important. We devalue the future because it seems distant and uncertain. But the Viking operated with hyperbolic temporal urgency. They knew the future was uncertain, but they knew it was short. This forced them to invest immediately in what really mattered. First, legacy. What you build today must last beyond you. If you were a blacksmith, your axe had to be perfect because it might save your son's life. If you were a boat builder, your drakkar had to withstand the severest storm because failure meant the death of the entire crew. There was no room for good enough or quiet quitting. Your reputation, your legacy, was your only ticket to eternal time, what they called orlog, the destiny woven by actions. And that brings us to practical lesson number 2, the second pillar of Viking life. Practical lesson number 2, the cult of mastery and the weight of contribution. The second pillar of Viking life, and perhaps the most contrasting with modern society, is the absence of existential drift. In the Viking world, there was no room for the question, "What is my purpose?" Your purpose was defined by your utility and your mastery. Think of the Viking ship, the drakkar. It is the ultimate metaphor for their society. A drakkar wasn't a toy or a luxury, it was a machine of survival and expansion. Every piece of that ship and every person inside it had a critical, highly specialized function where failure put everyone's life at risk. The carpenter who built the side planks couldn't be average. The rower who set the pace couldn't be distracted. The navigator who read the stars and waves couldn't make mistakes. Mastery was not a hobby, it was a requirement for community survival. In our age of abundance, utility has become optional. We can go years without developing a real skill that is indispensable to the community or our own survival. The result is the modern crisis of meaning. People feel lost because they aren't needed in a fundamental way. The Vikings valued handwerk, manual labor and craftsmanship excellence above all else. A warrior who didn't know how to handle his sword perfectly was dead weight. A housewife who didn't know how to manage farm resources during winter was a threat to the family. Honor didn't come from a title, but from the flawless execution of your function. The practical finitude generates a quality of life that we have lost: temporal density. Think of the difference between a glass of water and a glass of mercury. Both occupy the same volume, but one is light and the other is incredibly dense. The Vikings' life was dense. Every day had to count because it could be the last. There was no time for indecision, for shallow relationships, or for the passive consumption of entertainment. Mental and physical energy was directed towards survival, improvement, and contribution. Their life planning was focused on the short and medium term, which paradoxically guaranteed maximum execution. If you have 40 years to leave a legacy, you don't have the luxury of waiting for inspiration. You act. You build the boat today. You train with the sword today. You settle the dispute today. How do we apply this? We cannot, and do not want to, simulate a Saxon invasion or a medieval plague, but we can simulate the scarcity of time through the philosophy of memento mori, remember that you will die, and non-negotiable deadlines. The practical application is the radical elimination of maybe and later. If you have an important project, do not put it on your agenda for someday. Give it an execution date that is painfully close. If you want to learn something, don't enroll in a 5-year course. Find an immersion method that forces learning in 5 months. The Vikings didn't have the concept of a comfortable retirement at 65. Their retirement was Valhalla. And to get there with honor, they needed to prove they had used their time on earth with ferocity and excellence. The greatest tragedy of modern longevity isn't disease, it is boredom. It is the feeling that since there is so much time, nothing needs to be done with excellence now. Time stretches, and with it, the quality of our attention and effort dilutes. The Viking, conversely, lived in a state of flow and total presence. When he was at sea, he was at sea. When he was on the battlefield, he was on the battlefield. Distraction was a luxury that cost lives. We have lost this capacity for deep presence because we allow technology and the promise of a distant future to steal the value of the present moment. Lesson 3 invites us to create an artificial yet real urgency. Ask yourself daily, if I had only one more year of useful life, what would I do today? And more importantly, what would I stop doing? The answer to this last question is where the true power of the Viking mindset of temporal density lies. Recap and the grand conclusion. We have reached the heart of the matter. Why a life of 40 years forged in ice and iron can be more valuable, fuller, and more lived than a life of 80 years spent in comfort. We have unveiled the 3 lessons of the North. Lesson number 1, the forge of discomfort. Comfort is the anesthetic of the soul. Vikings didn't flee from physical or mental pain. They sought it as the primary mechanism of growth. The challenge wasn't something to be avoided, but the raw material of identity. If you want density in your life, you must voluntarily seek friction. Lesson number 2, the strength of utility. Happiness is an unstable byproduct. Honor is the result of utility. The Viking had an irreplaceable role in their tribe. Their existence was justified by their contribution. If you feel lost, stop looking for what makes you happy and start looking for what makes you indispensable. The weight of responsibility is what gives depth to your soul. Lesson number 3, temporal density. Death was not the end, but the great editor of their lives. Short life expectancy created radical urgency, eliminating procrastination and forcing immediate excellence. Time is finite. Stop living as if you have 500 years in the bank and start treating every hour as if it were the only currency you truly possess. The grand conclusion is this. The statistical longevity science has given us is a gift, but it becomes a curse if it isn't filled with density. The Vikings showed us that the quality of life is not measured by its duration, but by its intensity and the weight of your actions. They didn't live longer, they lived more now. Your challenge is not to live to 80. Your challenge is to ensure that when you get there, you don't look back and see 40 years of life repeated twice. Your challenge is to ensure that every decade is a new saga, a new chapter forged in utility and urgency. Modern life offers us safety and comfort, but demands a terrible price: the loss of purpose and the dilution of time. To reverse this, we need to incorporate the mindset of survival and excellence of the ancients. We need to be the Vikings of our own era, navigating not frozen fjords, but the turbulent seas of information and distraction. The true life is not the one that lasts the longest, but the one lived with the greatest intensity and utility. Revisiting the battlefield. Deepening the application. If you have absorbed these 3 lessons, you are ready for the next level of application. Understanding the Viking mindset is the first step. The second is transforming that mindset into practical results in the 21st century. Let's revisit the battlefield of your modern life through the lens of the Norsemen. The first lesson, the forge of discomfort, wasn't just about enduring the cold or the physical pain of battle. It was about mastering mental entropy. The Viking knew that a body and mind that aren't tested atrophy. Today, our greatest enemy isn't the thimble winter, but the sterile, constant heat of comfort. We live in a temperature-controlled bubble with instant access to cheap dopamine, which makes us hypersensitive to any real friction. The practical application of this lesson is the deliberate choice of productive suffering. Waking up earlier, resisting the impulse to check your phone, submitting to high-intensity exercise, or facing difficult conversations. If you don't choose your forge, the world will choose your furnace: anxiety, boredom, and emotional fragility. The modern forge is discipline. The second lesson, the strength of utility, is the antidote to the existential void of our era. The ancient warrior, the Carl in Norse society, had a role intrinsically linked to the clan's survival. He was a builder, a farmer, a protector. His identity wasn't defined by his salary, but by his service. In the 21st century, most people have jobs disconnected from any tangible survival outcome. We work on spreadsheets that generate more spreadsheets. This distance between effort and meaning is what fuels the epidemic of depression and burnout. The Viking didn't have time for identity crises. He had a ship to build and a farm to protect. Utility is dignity. The secret is to reconnect your work, whatever it is, to a purpose that transcends your bank account. What are you building that will last beyond your life? What are you protecting that is bigger than you? If you don't feel useful, your mind, in a misguided attempt to protect you from boredom, will create crises. And finally, the third lesson, temporal density, is the brutal and liberating.
The 40-year life expectancy wasn't a sentence, but a catalyst.
It forced the Viking to live in the now with an intensity that we, expecting to live 80 or 90 years, simply failed to replicate. We traded depth for duration. We spend decades postponing life, waiting for retirement, waiting for the right moment, accumulating experiences instead of living them. Life for them was measured in kairos, qualitative time, the opportune moment, and not in chronos, chronological time, the passing of seconds. Think of the difference. 80 years lived with 50% presence, postponing dreams, consuming passively, or 40 years lived with 100% intensity, building, exploring, failing greatly, and loving deeply. Which life is longer? The answer lies in density. The Viking teaches us that the true tragedy isn't dying young, but living to 80 and discovering that you never really lived. The grand conclusion is this: Viking resilience wasn't a genetic trait, but a philosophy of life forged in necessity. They understood that safety is an illusion and that growth only occurs at the frontier of discomfort. They embraced weird, inevitable fate and used the finitude of life as the greatest motivation to act with meaning today. You don't need to pick up an axe and board a drakkar to apply this. You do, however, need to take the reins of your own narrative. Stop outsourcing your resilience to modern comfort. Choose your forge, find your utility, and maximize every moment as if Valhalla were waiting around the corner. But while we have covered the forging of the body and spirit, the greatest challenge of the 21st century is the mental war. How do you train your body and mind to withstand the hardness of the modern world, which is less physical and more psychological? In our next video, we will dive into the 5 mental survival tactics of ancient warriors that will armor your brain against modern stress and burnout. If you feel your mind is being attacked by anxiety and overload, and you want to build the mental resilience of a warrior who does not bow, click the link appearing on the screen or in the description now. Leave a comment. Which of these 3 lessons do you need to apply today to start living with more density? The forge of discomfort, the strength of utility, or temporal density? Your saga begins now. Don't live a long and empty life. Live a dense life.